So apparently, folks, Joe Biden is not going anywhere, even as we learn shocking new details about his mental decline. The president huddling with his family over the weekend to do a photo shoot with Annie Leibovitz and to hash out what to do about the avalanche of calls to step aside. They reportedly urged him to stay in the race and want staffers fired for overloading Biden's brain before the debate. Jill and Hunter Biden are said to be the strongest voices in support of staying the course. The first son wants America to see that his father is, quote, scrappy and in command of the facts rather than the stumbling, aging president Americans saw on Thursday night. And so far, top Democrats are willing to go to bat for him.
Yes, it was a bad performance. I know when I see what I call preparation overload.
I'm with Joe Biden, and it's our assignment to make sure that he gets over the finish line come November.
We both had a difficult debate, and yet we still managed to go on to win. One debate is not a career.
It is always a bad bet to bet against Joe Biden. I think he's the only Democrat who can beat Donald Trump.
But forget about making it to November. Can Biden even do the job now? White House aides are telling Axios that Joe Biden is dependably engaged from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. every day. And after that, he checks out, prone to absent-minded gaffes and fatigue. But his campaign is doubling down in new ads.
I know how to tell the truth. And I know, like millions of Americans know, when you get knocked down, you get back up.
And the First Lady is defending her husband in a glam new Vogue spread. She says the critics, quote, will not let those 90 minutes define the 4 years he's been president. We will continue to fight. First off, Greg, when your entire party is in meltdown mode, maybe you cancel the Annie Leibovitz family photo shoot.
No, that's too important. That's too important for these people. Dependably engaged. Does that mean he's wearing Depends? I have no idea what that means. And I just worry about the terrorists that are watching right now. It would be very rude for you guys to somehow attack us when he's not dependably engaged. So if you can call Canada beforehand, and then we'll get back, just leave something on our voicemail, because I think it would be rude. You should refrain from attacking us when Joe is not dependably engaged. Remember, the media reacted in horror over Joe's condition, not because they saw it, it's because we saw it. I still think it's the worst scandal in political history, a party and a compliant media protecting a sham government run by a collection of progressive interests, and because they prefer that to democracy. It's just easier this way. And now they're shifting it back to like, well, Trump lies, Trump lies, Trump lies. There's no lie like this. It's not comparison. There's no comparison. And also, it pisses me off when I hear these journalists talking about how they were hoodwinked. This was like the most important job of your life, breaking a huge story, and you let it go right past you. I mean, this is worse than Watergate. You know, CNN said that every single day. Well, here it is. And they chose Stormy Daniels over this. How can anybody trust the news anymore? I mean, you didn't trust it anyway, but now you know their alliances and their biases prevent them from basically lying, gaslighting 300 million people. And look at all the damage that has been done under Joe Biden. Open borders, crime waves, homelessness, open drug markets. This is all products of woke Marxism. So it all flourished under the hood of Biden's presidency. He was the hood ornament, shiny and useless, but meant to run cover for a radical agenda. That is why they're fighting so hard, because they would rather have a headless president and still be in control.
Well, the other thing about it, in addition to all that, is that the news that came out of the family meeting was that they were blaming the staff. And they made it very clear. Somebody called the New York Times from Camp David and said, we blame the people who did the prep. My favorite takeaway, Judge, though, is that there was somebody in the family, one of the grandkids, wants to take on a more active role in the campaign, including working with social media influencers. Like, that's going to do it.
You know, first of all, the idea that they would blame the staff, I mean, think about it. Who else are they going to blame? They're not going to blame Joe or Jill. I mean, of course they're going to blame the staff. And I think it's interesting that Jen Psaki's response to that is if you're directing anger at the prep for the debate, the aides, you're not addressing the right thing. Mm-hmm. She's got her priorities right. But, you know, the fact that all of those people that we heard from, you know, the senators, and they're basically saying, you know, this guy he's a great president. How can you promote a guy and be honest to your oath to the American people and the Constitution when you know that he is not engaged for more than 6 hours a day? When you actually saw that debate that we all saw, it's more than disingenuous. It is just un-American. This man, and Dana, I go back to what you said. This man has to be prepared at 3 in the morning to answer the question, what do we do now, sir? Okay? And he is not that man. He's not that man at 9 o'clock at night. We saw that. But you can't help but think that the reason the family is so into this is it's a dysfunctional family. 2 of these kids are drug addicts. Hunter Biden ends up sleeping with his dead brother's wife and hooks her on drugs. 9 of the Bidens have tens and hundreds of $1,000s in their accounts because of the work that Joe and Hunter did around the world. So, you know, politics is good business for these people. It's about them and not about us. Jill is so enamored with being the first lady, and every day you see her in these designer dresses, and today on the Vogue cover, a $5,000 Ralph Lauren dress. I mean, she's so into that. She spoke to Joe Biden, and she's the one who I blame this on. Like, after that debate that was cringeworthy and embarrassing, Joe, you did such a great job. You answered every question. It was like a kindergarten teacher with a bunch of 5-year-olds. And the fact that they're all gaslighting us, I think, is horrible. And I think that Joe Biden, and I say this in the best way that I can, he's a man who attained the top position in this country. He became president of the United States. He deserves, at this point, he loves the beach. He should be at the beach with his family, with his grandkids. But they don't want that. And don't let them tell you that it's about the country, because it's about them. And my last question, who's going to call for the 25th Amendment and who's running the country?
Well, they were supposed to have a cabinet meeting, but that got canceled. I can imagine why. So, Kevin, I have 100,000 questions for you, but I will only ask you a couple. One, the Wall Street Journal 2 weeks ago had a piece where they had 45 sources. Many of them were speaking anonymously, and maybe you don't like, maybe we all don't like that, you prefer them on the record, but you can understand why they didn't. And the reporters said, we stand by our story. Their editor said, we stand by our story. The White House and the campaign absolutely trashed the Wall Street Journal and these reporters. Yeah. Only then, a week later, to confirm to Axios that everything in it was true, but to add that the president's only dependably engaged from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. So I'm just curious about the communication strategy. And also, my other question for you is, it's like the Biden campaign and the people who are in power, Hakeem Jeffries, the people we saw there, are completely disconnected from the rest of the Democrats. Even the left-leaning editorial boards, like the New York Times, for example, saying Joe Biden needs to get out. What say you?
I say a few things. Number one, Dana, I think, you know, the president campaigned almost as being a transitional figure in the Democratic Party, right? He talked about the next bench of Democrats coming up, Gretchen Whitmer, Josh Shapiro, others. And I think he views Donald Trump as an existential threat to this country. And he believes that he is uniquely situated as the incumbent, as the guy that defeated him 3.5 years ago, as uniquely qualified to do it again. And when you saw the initial impulse was maybe to step aside after 4 years and pass the torch. I don't know if Donald Trump wasn't the Republican nominee and leading in the polls, if Joe Biden would be running for a second term, in all seriousness.
Don't believe that. Anyway, but okay.
And number two, the campaign infrastructure is built around Joe Biden. He's raised a record sum of funds, 1,000 field officials, 200 or so field offices open in these battleground states. It's like a cruise ship that Joey was just on. It's so hard to change that midstream. And Dana, you raised the point on Friday. If not Joe Biden, then who? And that alternative might not be in a better position than Joe Biden come November.
Okay, so a couple of things that happened today. Politico buried the lead this morning. They had a story about Governor Gretchen Whitmer calling the campaign to say, hey, guys, I'm not the one out there promoting my name. I'm not trying to do that. Oh, and by the way, the debate performance guarantees that he cannot win Michigan. Like, well, that was Biden's only path to 270 is if he keeps Michigan. And then in addition, we just got a poll a couple of hours ago that New Hampshire, which Biden won, is now, Trump is up 44-42, and that's consistent over the past 2 months. So how are they thinking that everything's fine and that everyone's just going to move on .org and let this carry on?
I don't think they think it's fine. But I like you said, if not Biden, then who? And I thought about that myself. And there may be a name that I'm completely overlooking here. But, I mean, Gavin Newsom, I guess, is the guy who's campaigned for it. He's got a sex scandal of his own that was very public. And he's also the governor of California. So he loses on immigration and economy. So I don't see Gavin Newsom really doing anything to hurt Trump if Trump has an established lead. Kamala, nope. Michelle doesn't want it. She's living a rock star lifestyle. Why would they want to go back to the White House and be kind of almost poor again? Why would they want that? Whitmer, I don't know. I mean, I know a lot of people in Michigan. I don't know a lot of liberals in Michigan. They're not happy on her. Maybe Jeffries. Maybe Hakeem Jeffries is a sleeper they could throw in there. But it all comes down to this. Joe Biden is not going to impress voters enough to win over swing voters. He's not going to impress Democrats enough to rally the troops. Their campaign strategy from day one was for President Trump to self-destruct and be the version of himself he was in January of 2020 that they felt like they could run against. And President Trump showed up to the debate and in almost a boring way took all that away. And that's why they're scared. They're not scared because President Biden stood up there and said, my son died in Iraq. He's told that lie 10 times. To hell with the rest of us that fought in those wars. If I go fall down and get killed by a Prius right now because I have prosthetic legs, I didn't die in Afghanistan. I didn't die because of war. I died because something bad happened to me, which is why his son died. And I hate that for him. But when he's willing to tell lies like that in a campaign debate that is for his career, that means he's either not with it or completely thinks the rest of us are stupid. Maybe it's a little bit of both, but he's not going to get elected that way.
Can I ask you one last question about these terrorist threats that are announced against U.S. bases in Europe? And this comes a day after the White House on background tells, or maybe the campaign aides, tells a major news organization that he's only dependably engaged between 10 a.m. and 4 p.m.
Yeah, I didn't have a chance to fact check it, but I saw right before I came on, someone tweeted that the Abbey Gate bombing happened at 9:30 a.m.
It did. It was on America's Newsroom.
Okay, so 9:30 a.m., the worst attack in the last two presidencies on our troops. Maybe it should have happened a half an hour later and he would have been able to do something. That's what bothers me about this. You can't wake him up in the middle of the night and get enough meds in him to get a decision out of him. So whoever the second and third shift president is, I hope you're watching and paying attention in case we are attacked.
Dana, can I just add to that? When we're talking about Joe's fitness, we're talking about the election. That's 5 months away.
Right.
He's unfit to be president now.
And they want us to move on .org.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
I like that.
Click here to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page to catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You won't get it anywhere else.